London at night, where extravagant lights drape the city in a veil of mystery, and the most powerful figures gather in lavish parties. In a grand mansion nestled in the heart of Mayfair, an opulent charity gala is underway, drawing the elite of Britain's high society. John Harrington, 35 years old, CEO of one of the UK's leading financial conglomerates, is at the center of tonight's event. Dressed in a flawless black suit, his chiseled features exude a cold, commanding presence. He stands among the crowd like a monarch, distant yet irresistibly captivating. John is renowned not only for his remarkable career, but also for his secrecy and elusiveness. No one truly understands him, as he meticulously controls every detail of his public image. To the media, he is an impenetrable fortress. Emma Carter, the name that sends shivers through the financial world. One of the most formidable investigative journalists, she has built her reputation by exposing economic scandals and unveiling secrets the elite desperately want to keep buried. Beautiful and alluring, yet sharp as a blade, Emma fears no one. She has brought down corporate giants with her explosive articles, and this time, her target is John Harrington, the one man the press has never been able to crack. They have long known of each other. John sees Emma as a persistent nuisance, someone relentless in uncovering the truths he intends to keep hidden. To Emma, John is a prize catch, an enigma she is determined to unravel. Though they have never met, they already regard each other as sworn adversaries. Stepping into the opulent ballroom, it takes Emma no time to spot John. He stands among influential businessmen and politicians, yet there is an air of proud solitude about him. Without hesitation, she strides toward him, ready to begin her hunt. "Mr. Harrington, may I have a moment of your time?" Her voice is poised, her gaze gleaming with challenge. John leisurely lifts his glass of wine, casting her a detached glance. "I don't do interviews." Emma doesn't falter. She's used to refusals. "Just a few questions. I'm sure the public would love to hear your thoughts on the recent financial crisis." John smirks, a subtle, enigmatic curve of his lips, yet his eyes remain unreadable. "I have nothing to say." With that, he turns and walks away, leaving Emma standing there, her sharp gaze locked onto his retreating figure. But if John thought she would give up so easily, he was mistaken. Emma Carter never backs down before she gets what she wants. After the extravagant charity event, the atmosphere still lingers with echoes of artificial conversations and polite smiles. Emma leaves the main hall, but she's in no rush to head home. Instead, she makes her way to the bar on the rooftop of the hotel hosting the event. She needs a drink to shake off the frustration of her failed attempt to interview John Harrington. The bar is a sophisticated space bathed in soft golden light, with smooth jazz humming in the background. Emma chooses a secluded corner, orders a glass of whiskey, and sinks onto a high stool. She takes a slow sip, letting the burn of the liquor spread across her tongue, her sharp eyes glinting with thought. "Didn't take you for a whiskey drinker?" The deep, smooth voice behind her carries a teasing edge, making Emma narrow her eyes slightly. She turns to find John Harrington standing there, a glass of scotch in hand. His gaze is as cold as ever, yet there's a flicker of amusement in his expression, like a predator intrigued by its prey. "Surprised to see a busy businessman like you taking time to unwind?" Emma tilts her head, offering a dry smirk. John shrugs, pulling out the seat next to her with effortless ease. "I'm simply enjoying the best part of the evening, when the social masks come off." Emma chuckles, though her eyes remain sharp. "Is that so? I thought you never took yours off." John rests his elbow on the bar, tilting his head toward her, his smirk deepening. "Maybe I'll make an exception tonight." Their exchange is electric, words laced with challenge, neither willing to yield. Emma is not one to be intimidated, and John is too used to controlling the game. They push and pull, every remark a battle of wits. "I haven't forgotten how rudely you brushed me off earlier," Emma remarks, taking another sip of her drink, her tone laced with mockery. "And yet, you still can't seem to take your eyes off me," John murmurs, leaning in, his voice lower now, calm, smooth, but undeniably dangerous. Emma laughs, but there's an undeniable tension tightening in her chest. Something about this man both infuriates and draws her in. They keep drinking, their glasses emptying one after another, but instead of easing, the tension between them only transforms into something far more dangerous. As the alcohol courses through their veins, blurring the lines of reason, neither of them remembers who made the first move. But the moment their lips meet, all resistance shatters. John pulls her closer, his firm hands tracing the curve of her back. Emma doesn't push him away. Instead, she wraps her arms around his neck, sinking into the warmth of the man she once considered her enemy. The night in London is still, but in the lavish hotel suite above the city, two rivals are swept into a storm of passion and intoxication. All boundaries are erased, and when morning comes, they will have to face the consequences of this night. Welcome to Soul Stories. Booker. Life can be overwhelming, but here we share heartfelt tales to bring you peace, joy, and inspiration. Your support, every comment, like, and follow, means the world to us. It motivates us to create more meaningful and uplifting stories just for you. Did our latest story touch your heart? Leave a "I am happy" in the comments if you agree. Subscribe now and be part of a community that spreads love, kindness, and positivity. Let's make every day a little brighter, together. The first light of day seeped through the curtains, casting a golden glow across the spacious hotel suite. Emma stirred, the lingering haze of alcohol sending a dull ache through her head, pulling her back to reality. She blinked, her mind sluggishly registering the firm, warm embrace enveloping her. John Harrington's steady breath brushed against her hair, his arm locked securely around her waist, as if unwilling to let her go. A surge of tension shot through her. Waking up in the arms of the man she had always considered an adversary was the last thing she had expected. A second later, as if jolted by electricity, she jerked away, scrambling out of his grasp. But in her haste, she inadvertently woke him. John's eyes fluttered open, still clouded with sleep, yet carrying a glint of amusement. Instead of immediately releasing her, his fingers lazily trailed over her waist before finally letting go. "You're up earlier than I expected." His voice was deep, slightly husky, entirely too seductive. Emma inhaled sharply, forcing herself to stay composed despite the erratic pounding of her heart. She pulled the sheet tightly around herself, willing herself to ignore John's presence. This was a mistake. Propped up on one elbow, John regarded her with more amusement than concern. "A mistake?" he drawled, his tone laced with intrigue. "If I remember correctly, you didn't seem to object when I kissed you last night." Emma's eyes widened, heat rushing to her face. She gritted her teeth. "I was drunk." John arched a brow, his dark gaze assessing her. "Is that so? Strange. I distinctly recall you pulling me closer." Emma's grip on the sheet tightened. She refused to get drawn into this. Regardless, we should forget this ever happened. It meant nothing. Silence stretched between them as John seemed to consider her words. Then with a casual shrug, he replied, "If that's what you want." But in his gaze, there was something else, something unreadable, flickering just beneath the surface. Emma didn't wait to decipher it. She quickly gathered herself and left the room, leaving behind the man who had just blurred every line between enemy and something far more dangerous. As soon as Emma stepped out of the hotel, blinding flashes erupted around her. A swarm of reporters had appeared out of nowhere, cameras raised high, voices overlapping in a frenzy of questions. "Emma Carter, did you and John Harrington spend the night together? When did your relationship start? Is this a secret affair between the elite?" Emma froze, her mind racing. Behind her, she sensed movement. John was stepping out, still impeccably dressed, his expression unsettlingly composed. They could have ignored the questions and walked away. That would have been the logical move. But John Harrington was never one to let the media control the narrative. Instead of dodging the attention, he did the unthinkable. He stopped, turned to face the reporters, and in a calm, measured tone, he declared, "I don't want to hide it anymore. Yes, Emma and I are together. We'll be getting engaged next week." Silence hung in the air for a brief moment before chaos erupted. Emma's brain short-circuited. What the hell did he just say? She spun around to face him, eyes blazing. "What did you just say?" John smiled, but there was a dangerous glint in his gaze. Half amusement, half something far more calculated. Before she could unleash her fury, he leaned in, his breath warm against her ear. "I'm simply turning the situation to my advantage, my dear fiancé." And before Emma could so much as protest, John smoothly wrapped an arm around her waist, pulling her close with infuriating ease. His grip was firm, possessive, giving the cameras exactly what they wanted. Panic surged in Emma's chest as she tried to break free, but John held her steady, lowering his voice just enough for only her to hear. "Stay calm, darling. We wouldn't want to cause a bigger scene, would we?" Teeth clenched, Emma knew he was right. If she reacted too aggressively, it would only feed the frenzy. Begrudgingly, she let him guide her toward the waiting car. The door shut behind them, sealing them inside a bubble of silence. But the tension inside the car was suffocating. Emma turned to John, her glare sharp enough to cut. "What the hell are you doing, John?" John leaned back against the seat, his piercing blue eyes glinting with amusement. "Helping you out of a mess." Emma took a deep breath, struggling to keep her temper in check. "Helping me? Or throwing me into an even bigger disaster?" John shrugged, his signature smirk playing at his lips. "A little of both." Emma's fingers curled into fists. She had faced powerful, manipulative men before, but John Harrington was different. He wasn't just dangerous. He had just made her the next challenge he intended to conquer. Emma had never imagined she would become the center of media attention in this way. That morning, while she was still trying to process the insane public declaration John had made, the headlines had already taken over every major news outlet. Notorious CEO John Harrington engaged a top investigative journalist, Emma Carter. Enemies turned lovers, the power couple no one saw coming, a secret love affair or a high-stakes deal, the truth behind the tycoon and the journalist. Emma sat on the couch in her apartment, scrolling through article after article, her frustration mounting. Every news site, every social media platform was exploding with discussions about her and John Harrington. "Son of a bitch," she muttered under her breath, slamming her phone onto the coffee table. Before she could even begin to figure out how to handle this disaster, her phone vibrated again. The caller ID made her stomach tighten. John Harrington. "We need to talk." His voice was calm, unaffected, like this wasn't the PR catastrophe of the century. Emma inhaled deeply. She knew she couldn't avoid this. Seated across from John in his sleek, luxurious office, Emma could feel the weight of his gaze. He wasn't the least bit rattled by the chaos he had unleashed. If anything, he looked perfectly at ease, as if this had all been part of his grand plan. "I don't have time for this mess, John. You owe me an explanation." Her arms crossed, voice laced with irritation. John leaned back in his chair, his fingers interlocked as he studied her. His piercing blue eyes held her in place like a predator assessing its prey. "We have two options," he said, voice calm yet firm. "One, you publicly deny everything, but that will only encourage the press to dig deeper and twist the narrative against us." Emma frowned. As much as she hated to admit it, he was right. If they denied the rumors now, the media would become even more relentless, desperate to uncover the real truth. John continued, his tone unwavering. "Option 2, we get married for 6 months, then go our separate ways." Emma blinked, utterly stunned. "You're joking." Without missing a beat, John reached into his desk and slid a thick document toward her. "This is a marriage contract. 6 months, then we divorce. You walk away with your reputation intact, and I protect my business interests. No complications, no strings attached." Emma picked up the contract, skimming through the clauses. It was clinical, precise, devoid of any romantic pretense, a purely strategic arrangement. "And you think I'll just agree to this?" she asked, skepticism lacing her voice. John leaned forward, his gaze sharp and unyielding. "If you have a better alternative, I'm all ears." Silence stretched between them. Emma exhaled slowly, gripping the papers in her hands. The truth was, there was no better alternative. After a long pause, she set the contract down and met his gaze. "Fine, but after 6 months, you stay the hell out of my life." John's lips curled into a slow, knowing smirk. Deal. Less than a week after the shocking engagement announcement, the extravagant wedding of CEO John Harrington and investigative journalist Emma Carter had become the most anticipated event in the media world. The cathedral was adorned in breathtaking elegance, a gathering place for the most powerful figures in finance, politics, and journalism. Outside, hundreds of reporters crowded together, eager to capture even a single moment of the newlyweds. Inside, Emma stood before a grand mirror, dressed in a pristine white wedding gown. Soft curls framed her delicate features, and yet, as she gazed at her reflection, everything felt surreal. A marriage without love, a performance for the public? Then why did she feel an odd flutter in her chest at the thought of the man waiting for her beyond these doors? Ready? John's voice echoed behind her, pulling her from her thoughts. She turned to find him standing there. His usual impenetrable gaze softened just slightly. Taking a deep breath, she nodded. Let's go, my soon-to-be husband. John extended his hand toward her, a knowing smirk playing on his lips. Not soon to be. As of today, I am your husband, at least for the next 6 months. Mrs. Harrington. Walking down the aisle, Emma could feel the weight of hundreds of eyes on her, but none of them mattered except for one. John Harrington, a man known for his cold, calculated demeanor, stood beside her, his blue eyes holding something she couldn't quite decipher. And then came the moment. Do you, John Harrington, take Emma Carter to be your lawfully wedded wife? Without hesitation, he said, I do. Emma hesitated for a fraction of a second before uttering the same words. I do. As John leaned in to seal their union with a kiss, she expected it to be a mere formality, another act in their grand performance. But the moment his lips met hers, something shifted. A gentleness beneath his firm touch, a warmth hidden behind his composed exterior. This is just for show, she reminded herself. Then why was her heart racing? As of today, Emma Carter was no longer just a fearless journalist. She was Mrs. John Harrington. And this contract marriage might be far more complicated than either of them had anticipated. Life as Mrs. John Harrington was nothing like a normal marriage. On paper, they were husband and wife. In reality, they were two strangers bound by a 6-month contract. Immediately after their lavish wedding, they moved into John's estate, a magnificent mansion in Chelsea, one of the most exclusive neighborhoods in London. It was grand, elegant, and meticulously designed to perfection. But much like its owner, the house was cold, impeccable yet devoid of warmth. Emma rolled her suitcase inside, her sharp eyes scanning the expansive space. I expected a little warmth, maybe a hint of a real home, but this feels more like a 5-star hotel. Behind her, John loosened his tie, shrugging off his suit jacket with practiced ease. If you'd like to redecorate, be my guest, he said casually. Emma turned to him, raising a brow. I doubt I'll be here long enough to care. John smirked, but there was something unreadable in his gaze as he stepped closer. From the very beginning, they had agreed. They would live together, but their personal lives would remain separate. John took the master bedroom, while Emma was given a separate room on the other side of the house, a perfect arrangement to avoid any unnecessary intimacy. But no matter how much distance they tried to maintain, living under the same roof meant inevitable encounters. Early in the morning, Emma headed to the kitchen, intending only to grab a quick cup of coffee. But to her surprise, John was already there, seated at the breakfast table, his posture composed as he read the Financial Times. Good morning, John greeted her without looking up. Emma crossed her arms, leaning against the counter. I thought CEOs like you were out the door before sunrise. John smirked slightly. I have a late meeting today, and I don't skip breakfast. Emma's gaze flickered toward the table, toast, eggs, and a steaming cup of black coffee. You made this yourself? I figured you'd have a private chef. John set the newspaper down, giving her a pointed look. I don't like other people making my breakfast. Emma said nothing, simply poured herself a cup of coffee before settling into the chair across from him. So, I guess we're just going to live like two strangers sharing a house? She took a sip, her tone casual. John rested his elbow on the table, his gaze assessing. Not exactly. The press is still watching closely. To maintain appearances, we should at least pretend to be a normal married couple in public. Emma let out a dry chuckle. A marriage based entirely on performance. Sounds so romantic. John didn't reply. He simply watched her with that same unreadable expression. No matter how much they tried to keep their distance, sharing the same house meant constantly running into each other, often in ways they didn't anticipate. One evening, fresh from a shower, Emma stepped out of her room wrapped in a delicate silk robe, her damp hair cascading over her shoulders. And just her luck, she walked straight into John. He had just emerged from his study, the top buttons of his white dress shirt undone, a glass of red wine in hand. He looked exhausted, yet annoyingly irresistible. His gaze flickered over her, pausing just a fraction too long on the loosely tied robe. Emma narrowed her eyes and crossed her arms. "How long do you plan on staring?" John, completely unfazed, arched a brow. "If you don't want to be stared at, you could wear something less distracting." Emma scoffed. "This house belongs to me as much as it does to you, John. I can wear whatever I damn well please." John smirked, his expression unreadable. "By all means, continue. I won't object." With that, he walked past her, but she could still feel the weight of his gaze lingering just before he disappeared down the hall. Emma exhaled sharply. These 6 months were going to be much harder than she had expected. To maintain the image of a perfect marriage, John and Emma frequently attended high-profile events together. At one particular gala for the financial elite, Emma stunned in a breathtaking crimson gown that hugged her figure flawlessly. She exuded elegance, confidence, and an undeniable allure. John, ever the embodiment of perfection in a sharp black suit, seemed different tonight. His eyes lingered on her more than usual. Throughout the evening, he kept her close, a firm hand resting on her waist. Whenever someone approached, he instinctively pulled her closer, as if it were his second nature. Emma frowned slightly and leaned in to whisper, "You don't have to be this convincing." John lowered his head, his warm breath brushing against her ear. "I'm simply playing the devoted husband role, darling. Just like you." Emma stiffened. She hated the way he said darling, mocking, teasing. But what she hated more was the fact that something inside her stirred at his touch. It was supposed to be just a contract, a scripted performance, a temporary arrangement. But with each passing day, the line between pretend and real blurred. Emma reminded herself not to get caught up in John's game. The problem was, she wasn't entirely sure he was just acting anymore. Despite now being Mrs. Harrington in name, Emma never forgot her true purpose. This marriage was nothing more than a temporary agreement. She wanted these 6 months to pass quickly, to escape this artificial life and the man she had always viewed with suspicion. John Harrington, a powerful, ruthless billionaire, a man who commanded the financial world with an iron grip, feared by his rivals, and willing to do whatever it took to maintain his empire. No one reached his level of success without leaving a trail of destruction behind. Emma was convinced that behind his polished image lay secrets, dark, buried truths he was desperate to keep hidden. She hadn't abandoned her instincts as a journalist. She still searched for information, observed his every move, took every opportunity to go through documents in his office, secretly listened in on his private meetings, and analyzed every word of his phone calls. But what frustrated her the most was nothing. John's financial records were clean, almost too clean. No suspicious transactions, no hidden offshore accounts, no shady deals. Every business move he made was legally airtight, every investment transparent and above board. Everything was too perfect. But Emma didn't believe it. No one reached his level of power without skeletons in the closet. Sitting at her desk, she stared at the endless streams of financial data on her laptop, chewing her lip in frustration. There had to be something. She was sure of it. Emma had always thought of John Harrington as cold, detached, ruthless, a businessman who cared for nothing but power and profit. She had never seen him show concern for anyone. But being in this marriage, Emma started to notice something different. One evening, after a long day at the newsroom, Emma walked into the house and froze. A bouquet of white roses sat neatly on the coffee table. Her brows knitted together. She wasn't the sentimental type, but she did have a small habit. She always kept a vase of white roses in the house. She turned toward John, who was standing by the bar, pouring himself a glass of whiskey. "Where did these flowers come from?" she asked, crossing her arms. John didn't even glance up. "Picked them up on the way home." Emma arched a brow. On the way home? She had already checked. There were no flower shops along his usual route. Her eyes narrowed. "Are you sure about that?" John took a slow sip of his drink, his expression unreadable. "Believe what you want." Emma pressed her lips together. She didn't say anything else, but something strange twisted inside her. It was nearly midnight when Emma stepped out of the newsroom, exhaustion pressing on her shoulders. The city lights flickered against the cold London air, sending a shiver down her spine. She reached for her phone, about to call for a taxi. Then a sleek black Rolls-Royce pulled up at the curb. The window lowered, revealing a familiar pair of piercing blue eyes. "Get in!" Emma raised an eyebrow, stepping closer with her arms crossed. "What are you doing here?" John remained as composed as ever. "I was in the area." Emma let out a laugh, tilting her head. "Really? Because your office is in the opposite direction of my newsroom." For the first time, he hesitated. Just for a second. Then with a nonchalant shrug, he said, "Then I must have taken a wrong turn." Emma scoffed, shaking her head. Still, she reached for the door handle and slipped into the seat beside him. She wasn't sure what was happening between them, but she knew one thing for certain. This contract marriage was no longer as simple as she had thought. That morning, Emma was sick. Her body burned with fever, her head pounded relentlessly, and every muscle ached as she lay curled up in bed. She expected nothing from John. This was just a contract marriage, after all. Why would he care? But the next morning, when she finally dragged herself out of her room, she stopped short at the sight before her. On the dining table sat a glass of orange juice and a box of fever medicine. She frowned, picking up the glass before turning toward John, who was casually sitting on the sofa, flipping through some documents. "Did you do this?" she asked, her voice still hoarse from being sick. John barely glanced at her, his response as indifferent as ever. "Just don't pass out in the middle of the house." Emma looked at him, then back at the juice in her hands. She took a slow sip. It wasn't too sweet, nor too sour, exactly how she liked it. A quiet chuckle escaped her lips. But deep inside, something unfamiliar stirred. To the rest of the world, John Harrington was a ruthless businessman, cold, detached, indifferent to everyone. But when the media attacked Emma, he was always the first to defend her. One time at a press conference, journalists bombarded her with endless questions, trying to expose their marriage as fake. Emma was starting to lose patience, irritation bubbling beneath the surface. Before she could respond, John reached for her hand and pulled her close. His grip was firm, his voice sharp as he looked straight at the reporters. "She is my wife. Do any of you have a problem with that?" Emma turned to him, momentarily stunned. He didn't need to do that, but he did. Another time, a rumor surfaced, accusing Emma of using John's influence to boost her own career. Before she could even react, John had already spoken publicly. "Emma doesn't need my name to shine. She was one of the most talented journalists long before she married me." Just like that, the speculation was crushed. Sitting in front of her laptop, watching the clip of John's statement, Emma found herself at a loss for words. John never spoke sweet words. He never expressed affection in obvious ways. But somehow, he was always there. Always watching over her in his own way. Always protecting her, even if he'd never admit it. And somehow that meant more to her than any love confession ever could. Late at night, the Harrington estate was eerily silent. Emma moved cautiously as she pushed open the heavy door to John's study. The room was as grand as expected. Towering bookshelves, a sleek walnut desk, and a warm glow from the golden desk lamp. It was the perfect blend of wealth and power, much like the man who owned it. She knew no one was as flawless as John Harrington. A man that successful, that untouchable, it wasn't natural. Emma was certain he was simply good at hiding things. With the sharp instincts of an investigative journalist, she began flipping through the documents on his desk. Nothing. Every record was clean. Every contract, every deal, transparent, legal, untouchable. But that in itself was too suspicious. Emma frowned, too deep in thought to notice the quiet footsteps behind her, until a deep, familiar voice broke the silence. "What exactly are you looking for, darling?" Emma froze. Her fingers instinctively clenched around the paper she was holding as she spun around. John stood at the doorway. He was leaning casually against the frame, hands in his pockets, his sharp blue eyes locked onto her with amusement, laced with something more dangerous. Emma took a slow breath, trying to mask the sudden panic racing through her veins. "No one is as perfect as you pretend to be," she said coldly. "I was just trying to see what you're hiding." John's lips curled into a smirk, calm, knowing, and undeniably infuriating. Then he moved. Each step he took was slow, deliberate, his presence overwhelming, predatory. "And did you find anything?" he murmured, his voice dark and teasing. Emma instinctively stepped back. She hadn't found anything, and she hated that. John kept advancing, his tall frame closing the distance between them. Emma backed away until her spine pressed against the bookshelf behind her. And suddenly, he was too close. The warmth of his breath ghosted against her cheek, his cologne intoxicating in the quiet tension between them. "You know, Emma," John murmured, voice impossibly low, his gaze trapping hers. Emma swallowed hard, her pulse pounding. "The only thing I've ever hidden," he leaned in, his lips nearly brushing against hers, "is how I really feel about you." Emma's breath caught in her throat. "What?" Her mind screamed at her to not believe him, to call him out on his mind games. But his eyes, for the first time, they weren't cold. They weren't unreadable. They were serious, and that terrified her more than anything. Before she could process it, John tilted his head closer, so close that she could feel the heat radiating from him. "Now tell me, Emma." His voice was a quiet challenge, laced with danger. "What are you going to do about it?" Emma stopped breathing. For a split second, she thought he might kiss her. And what scared her the most was that she wasn't sure if she would stop him. But before he could touch her, Emma ducked under his arm, escaping before she lost herself completely. She ran. John chuckled under his breath as he watched her retreat, shaking his head. "Stubborn little thing," he mused, amusement flickering in his eyes. Meanwhile, Emma slammed her bedroom door shut, pressing her back against it, clutching her chest as if that could slow her frantic heartbeat. She felt something, but she wasn't ready to admit it. John hadn't meant to stop the car, but the moment he spotted Emma sitting across from another man, smiling, laughing, looking so effortlessly happy, he found himself pulling over. The man was tall, with warm brown hair and a relaxed, genuine smile. Emma's eyes sparkled as she laughed at something he said, her entire expression soft in a way John had never seen before. His fingers tightened around the steering wheel as he watched the man reach out, brushing a stray strand of hair from Emma's face. She didn't pull away. She just smiled as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Something tightened in John's chest. He didn't go inside. He didn't drive away. He just sat there, silently watching her smile, for someone else. And for the first time in his life, John Harrington felt out of control. Back at home, John buried himself in work, or at least he tried. But no matter how many reports he flipped through, no matter how many emails he read, his mind kept replaying that scene. Emma laughing, Emma looking at another man with warmth, Emma not pushing him away. A dull, unfamiliar frustration burned in his chest. John had never cared about things like this. Women came and went. None had ever held enough importance for him to care about what they did after. But this was different, because this time it was Emma, and he couldn't accept it. When Emma walked through the door that night, she didn't expect to find John waiting for her. His suit was still sharp, but the top button of his shirt was undone, his sleeves slightly creased, a rare sign of impatience. Then without preamble, he asked, "Does he like you?" Emma blinked. "What?" John's gaze was sharp, unyielding. "The man you had dinner with, does he like you?" For a second, she considered telling him the truth, that Liam was just an old friend, nothing more. But his possessive tone, his barely contained jealousy, made her want to push back. So instead, she smirked. Do you think every man I meet is in love with me? John didn't laugh. Instead, he closed the distance between them, his movements slow, deliberate. And then, in a voice lower than she had ever heard, he said, That would be impossible. Emma frowned. What are you talking about? John's eyes darkened, his fingers curling into fists before he finally exhaled sharply and said, Because I've liked you since the first time I met you. Emma froze. Her breath caught, her pulse skipped. She was a woman who had faced powerful men, who had walked into battles of words and power without flinching. But this made her heart pound like never before, because John Harrington, the cold, ruthless CEO she had spent months trying to unravel, had just confessed to her. And he wasn't joking. His eyes held no mockery, no arrogance, just undeniable truth. Emma wanted to deny it, to challenge him, to run. But before she could say a word, John leaned in, closing the last bit of space between them, his voice a husky whisper. And now, what are you going to do about it? Emma's breath hitched. For a brief second, she thought he might kiss her. And the most terrifying part, she wasn't sure if she wanted to stop him. Her instinct kicked in just in time. She stepped back. John let out a quiet, knowing chuckle. The second time she had run. The first was in his study, when she had been trapped between him and the bookshelf. This time she had run from his truth. John didn't chase her. He simply watched, his expression unreadable. But in his eyes there was something dangerous, something that said dash dash. You can run now, Emma, but not forever. Upstairs, Emma shut the door behind her, pressing a hand against her chest, where her heart was still racing. She squeezed her eyes shut, but no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't stop hearing his words. I've liked you since the first time I met you. John Harrington, the man she had once thought incapable of feeling anything, had fallen for her. And the most terrible... Emma hadn't fully processed her emotions after John's confession. Her heart was still racing. Her mind was still spinning. She hadn't even begun to understand what his words truly meant for them. But before she could figure it out, everything came crashing down. That morning, the moment she stepped out of her bedroom, her phone wouldn't stop ringing. Emma frowned, unlocking the screen. Dozens of missed calls, unread messages, and notifications. From colleagues, from friends, from people she didn't even know. And then a bold headline flashed across the screen. Harrington Group implicated in multi-billion financial scandal. Emma froze. Her breath hitched as she clicked the article, scanning the words as if they were knives piercing through her. The report accused John's company of being involved in a shady investment scheme, manipulating the market for massive profits. But what made her blood run cold was the last part. The article claimed that the source of the leaked information was none other than Emma Carter. Emma didn't hesitate. She grabbed her phone, stormed out of the room, and went straight to John's office. She barely registered, flinging the door open. John was standing by the massive glass window, the city skyline stretching behind him. His posture was rigid. His black suit was perfectly in place. In his hand, he held a crumpled newspaper, the very same article that was destroying her. Emma's chest rose and fell rapidly as she stared at him. You read it, didn't you? Her voice was sharp, laced with urgency. John didn't turn around. For the first time in months, he didn't meet her eyes. He just stood there, cold, silent, unreadable. The weight of his silence suffocated her. John, her voice cracked. Do you believe this? John's fingers tightened around the newspaper, his voice low and controlled. What do you want me to believe? Emma took a shaky breath, forcing herself to stay calm. You know me? I would never do something like this. I only report the truth. I don't fabricate stories. Finally, he turned. His blue eyes, the same ones that had looked at her with warmth just last night, were now cold as ice. But you've always suspected me, haven't you? Emma stilled. Her stomach dropped. He remembered. The months she had spent doubting him, the times she had gone through his files, looking for something, anything, to prove he was hiding something. even though she had never found anything, even though she had stopped suspecting him. John still remembered, and now he was throwing it back at her. "Yes," Emma admitted, her voice strained. "I doubted you, but I never made false accusations. I would never do something like this." John let out a low chuckle, but it was void of humor. Cold, sharp, and filled with something almost painful. "Would never?" His voice was calm. Too calm. He stepped forward, closing the space between them, his presence suddenly suffocating. "Then explain why it's your name in this article." Emma's fists clenched. "Someone is framing me," she snapped. "You have to believe me, John." But John said nothing. He just stood there, silent, distant. The weight of his doubt hit her harder than anything else. Emma stared at him, the man who just yesterday had confessed to liking her. And yet now he looked at her as if she were a stranger. A heavy, invisible wall had risen between them, thick, unbreakable, and unbearably cold. The media frenzy only grew worse. Reporters camped outside the Harrington estate, cameras flashing, microphones raised, desperate for a statement. And then the front doors opened. John stepped out. His expression was unreadable, his movements composed, his blue eyes as cold as the winter air. Emma rushed after him, her fingers grabbing onto his wrist. Desperation laced in her voice. "John, don't do this!" He finally turned to her, but the warmth he once held for her was gone. His eyes were empty. "I need time." 4 words and no explanations, no reassurances, just a cold, quiet retreat. Then without another glance, he stepped into the waiting car. The door shut, the engine roared to life, and just like that, he was gone. Emma stood there frozen, watching as the car disappeared into the distance, and it felt like her entire world had just collapsed. She bit her lip, her throat tightening, her chest burned. But she wouldn't cry. She couldn't cry. Not for the man who, only days ago, had admitted he cared for her. Not for the man who had once stood by her side. Not for the man who now doubted her and chose to walk away. Emma didn't even remember how she got back to her room. She collapsed onto the bed, gripping her phone tightly. The article was still on the screen. Accusations, lies, public backlash. Her name was being dragged through the mud, her reputation shattered. But none of it hurt as much as the memory of John's cold stare. Not the flashing cameras, not the harsh comments, not the betrayal the world believed she had committed. Just him, the way he had looked at her, like she was a stranger, like she was a mistake. Emma refused to let it end like this. She wouldn't just sit here and watch John walk away, watch everything fall apart. She had to find the truth. Because if she didn't, she would lose him forever. Emma refused to be framed for something she didn't do. If John wouldn't believe her, she would prove the truth herself, because she would never let someone else use her as a weapon to destroy him. Night after night, exhaustion clung to her like a second skin. But Emma didn't stop. She combed through documents, cross-referencing leaked information with internal data, searching for the smallest clue, and then she found it. This scandal wasn't random. It was orchestrated. A rival financial conglomerate had engineered the entire thing. They had been in direct competition with John for years. When they failed to defeat him in the market, they turned to media warfare. By manipulating the press, they didn't just tarnish his reputation. They dragged down Harrington Group's stock value, weakening John's control over his company, leaving the door open for a hostile takeover. Every move had been calculated. But what shook Emma the most was the name buried in the evidence, a name that sent an icy chill down her spine. Liam Carter, her childhood friend, the man who, just days ago, had sat across from her, smiling and reminiscing about old memories. It had all been a lie. Liam had used her to get to John. He had exploited their friendship to gain access, to plant the seeds of doubt in John's mind, to ensure that when the scandal broke, John wouldn't trust her. John had never been the type to trust easily, and Liam had used that against him, against them. Emma's fingers curled into fists. She had everything she needed, every piece of evidence. She could clear her name. She could expose the truth. But she knew evidence alone wouldn't be enough. Not after the damage had already been done. Not after everything that had been said. Would John even believe her if she placed this proof in front of him? She didn't know. But one thing was certain. Whether he believed her or not, she would still protect him. A truth revealed and a confession unexpected. That night, Emma went to see John. In her hands was the evidence that would expose everything. She had waited for this moment. But as she stood before the heavy doors of his study, her heart pounded wildly. She didn't know how this would end. She had found the truth. But was that enough to erase the distance between them? Would it be enough to bring him back to her? Taking a deep breath, she pushed open the door. John was waiting. He stood in the dimly lit study, his tall frame silhouetted against the warm glow of the lamp. His face was drawn with exhaustion, dark circles under his eyes, a sign that he hadn't been sleeping. But the coldness in his gaze had faded. Still, there was something guarded about the way he looked at her. "Why are you here?" His voice was rough, strained, as if he had already endured too much. Emma met his gaze head-on. Without a word, she stepped forward and placed the file onto his desk. "Because you need to know the truth." Her voice was steady, unwavering. "And because I never betrayed you." John stared at the folder, but he didn't open it. Instead, he looked at her. His blue eyes darkened, sharp, as if searching for something more than just facts and evidence. Seconds passed. Then in a voice heavier than she had ever heard before, he asked, "Why do you need to prove that to me?" Emma inhaled sharply, her fingers clenched into fists. And then she lifted her head. Her amber eyes burned with certainty. "Because I don't want to lose you." John froze. His breath caught. He couldn't believe what he had just heard. "I don't want to lose you." The words echoed like a thunderstorm inside him. It shattered everything. Every doubt, every wall, every inch of distance he had forced between them. She felt the same. For the first time, Emma Carter, stubborn, fierce, and always pushing him away, had admitted that she didn't want to let him go. Something inside John snapped. He moved. One step, two steps. Each step slow, controlled, but carrying the force of something unstoppable. Emma didn't move. She just watched him, as if daring him to come closer. And when there was barely any space left between them, John finally spoke, his voice low, deep, dangerously soft. "I already know the truth." Emma's breath hitched. "What?" John's lips curled into the faintest, most devastating smile. "I knew it wasn't you." Emma stared at him. Disbelief, relief, and something deeper all clashed inside her. "Then why didn't you?" John exhaled, his hand lifting as if he was about to touch her, but stopping just short. "Because I needed to hear you say it. Because for 4 months she had doubted him. Because for too long she had refused to let him in. Because he had already fallen in love with her. And he needed to know if she would ever let herself fall for him too. Tonight, he had his answer. The truth never needed proof. Emma's eyes widened. "What?" John held her gaze, his blue eyes deep, no longer cold, no longer distant. He had known all along. She didn't need to prove anything. She didn't need to hand him the evidence. He already knew the truth. Regret weighed heavily on him, constricting his chest. "I'm sorry," he murmured. His voice was rough with guilt, laced with a pain he had never let anyone see before. "I doubted you." Emma froze. She hadn't expected him to admit it so easily. She inhaled deeply, then exhaled with a soft, bittersweet smile. "No," she said quietly. "I'm the one who should be sorry." John frowned but stayed silent, waiting. Emma clenched her hands at her sides, her amber eyes filled with self-reproach. "I was the reason this happened." John stiffened. Emma held his gaze, willing herself to be brave. "Liam, the man I had dinner with, used me." John's entire body tensed. His fist clenched, his jaw tightening. Rage simmered beneath his composed exterior. Liam, that bastard. He had used her. He had used John's doubts. He had tried to destroy everything between them. Emma swallowed, her voice quieter now. If I hadn't let him back into my life, if I hadn't let him near us, maybe none of this would have happened. John said nothing, but there was no way he would let her blame herself. In one swift motion, he stepped forward and pulled her into his arms. No hesitation, no second thoughts, just pure, unfiltered emotion. Emma stiffened for a brief moment, but she didn't pull away, because for the first time in days she felt safe, wrapped in his warmth, surrounded by the steady, protective beat of his heart. John buried his face in her hair, holding her as if letting go would mean losing her forever. "Thank you." His voice was a soft murmur, rough yet filled with something that made her heart tremble. "Thank you for finally choosing me." Emma pulled back slightly, looking up at him. And for the first time, she didn't run. She lifted her arms, wrapped them around his neck, and pulled him down toward her. She kissed him, not out of impulse, not out of confusion, but because she wanted to, because she had finally found her answer. John's eyes widened for a fraction of a second, then he immediately responded. His hands cradled her face, his lips pressing against hers with undeniable hunger. This wasn't just a kiss. It was everything they had gone through. The pain, the longing, the waiting, and the love that had been buried for far too long. When they finally pulled away, their breaths mingled in the quiet space between them. No more hesitation, no more uncertainty. Only two hearts that had finally found each other. With the truth exposed, John Harrington's name was cleared. The Harrington Group emerged from the crisis stronger than ever, its stock value rebounding, its enemies realizing that John was not a man who could be easily defeated. As for Emma, she returned to work. But this time, John Harrington was no longer an investigation. He was something else, something more. The media no longer whispered about a contract marriage. Instead, the world began to believe in something far more powerful. A love story neither of them had planned for, but one that was real. John had always protected her, even when he didn't say it out loud. He didn't just shield her from the scandal. He risked everything to make sure she never had to suffer again. And Emma, she could no longer deny what had been in her heart all along. The 6-month contract was over. That morning, Emma walked into John's study, expecting to close this chapter of their lives. But the moment she stepped inside, her breath caught. On the desk, a single sheet of paper lay waiting, a contract termination form. She froze. A dull ache settled in her chest. She had waited for this moment. She had known this day would come. She was supposed to be happy. Then why? Why did she feel like her heart was breaking? Slowly she reached out, fingertips brushing against the paper. But before she could take it, a warm hand covered hers. She turned and found herself face to face with John. He was close, too close. His breath was calm, steady. Then right in front of her, he lifted the paper and tore it apart. Piece by piece, it fell to the ground, fluttering like white petals. Emma's eyes widened. "What are you doing?" John smiled, not the cold, unreadable smirk from their past, but something gentle, warm, and sure. He leaned in, his voice low, deep, and filled with certainty. "This contract is over." Emma's lips parted, her heart racing. But before she could speak, he whispered against her ear, "Because from now on, you are my wife. Not by contract, but by heart." Emma stood still, her entire world tilting. If this had been months ago, she might have turned away. She might have run from her own feelings, but not this time. She looked up at him, amber eyes glowing with an emotion she no longer wanted to hide. "Is that so?" she murmured, her voice softer than ever. John chuckled, his lips twitching into a smirk. "So, will you finally be my wife in every sense of the word?" Emma laughed softly. Then she did something she had never done before. She closed the distance first. Rising onto her toes, she wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed him, not as part of a contract, not as an act of pretense, but as a woman who had chosen him. John stilled for only a second. Then he pulled her in, deepening the kiss, claiming her completely. This time, There were no misunderstandings, no fears, no walls between them. Only two hearts that had finally found their way home. For the first time, John Harrington, the man who had once been cold, distant, and untouchable, laughed, and it was the happiest sound Emma had ever heard. Thank you for following this heartfelt story of Soul Stories channel. Share your thoughts about the story in the comments below. If you believe that true love can withstand all trials and sometimes begins in the simplest of ways, don't forget to hit the like button and share this story with your friends. To never miss out on touching and meaningful stories, subscribe to our channel and help us spread messages of love and warmth to everyone.